Youth sport is a billion-dollar industry. Athletic development plays a significant role in that. I'm your host, Nathan Parnham, athletic development coach and author of The Sporting Parent. Here, I'll share my thoughts on youth athletic development. Welcome to The Get Down, a podcast for parents, coaches, and schools involved in the youth sporting landscape to help set your athletes or programs up for success. Before we get stuck into today's episode, I just want to give a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Play. Play is a global leader in high-performance fit-outs. I've worked with a team at Play for many years now, not only due to the quality of products, but because I fundamentally align with their vision to inspire human performance. From their industry-proven athletic flooring, Icon X racks, to their equipment line, they are a testament to what high performance is all about. Check them out at play.us or on social media to learn more, including our show notes for further information.
1, 2, 3, 4.
A big thanks to our guest episode sponsor, GymAware. GymAware is the #1 velocity-based training company in the market. They've been around for over 22 years and are deservingly synonymous with VBT. GymAware Flex, in particular, is greatly desired by high schools due to its modest price point, ease of use with youth athletes, and for me personally, in these environments, it suits multiple purposes, which I've highlighted in episode number 3, the necessity in choosing technology for that reason in the school setting. GymAware has an exclusive offer for listeners of the Get Down podcast, offering 5% off any individual Flex unit using the code GETDOWN5 at checkout. This episode's guest represented Australian schools and under-21s and barbarians in rugby union before transitioning into the business of sport in 1997, joining Godfrey Pembroke as General Manager of Athletes First. Post MLC's purchase of Godfrey Pembroke, he continued to work in wealth management with Investco Asset Management, Absolutely Recruitment, and Godfrey Group, founded in 2004. From 2010, he has combined sport and financial services as the Director of SEQ Sports and Entertainment Finance, being the Head of Sport for Newington College, the General Manager for Foundation at New South Wales Rugby, CEO for Loyals Rugby, and consultant for the 2031 and 2033 USA Rugby World Cup bid, and founding partner at 15 Capital. He sits on various private and not-for-profit boards, including 15 Capital being the chairman, Intanius, Cohesion Capital, and New South Wales Positive Rugby Foundation. He is a former board member of the Major League Rugby and the US Rugby World Cup bid partnership. From a personal perspective, I met our guest whilst at Newington College in Sydney, Australia, and I can honestly say to date he has been the best boss that I've ever had. Not only was he able to get the best out of me professionally, but personally, he helped me out more than he'll ever know. Which is why I couldn't do a guest episode without stealing some of his time to help you, the listener, get a glimpse in how this man's mind works. Let me introduce to you our guest for this episode, James Godfrey. Something that stood out to me in our time working together was your ability to bring a multifaceted team of individuals and in instances of very different personalities together, working towards a one cause. And I suppose for the listeners out there, what I want you to share some insights in is, as a leader, what do you think were your biggest attributes in creating such strong contemporary bunch of professionals in a sporting department?
It's a good question. It's a great period of time pulling together that team, but because everyone was from sporting backgrounds, whether they be individually high-performing sporting backgrounds or they had been working and coaching in sporting backgrounds, being really, really clear on purpose, being clear on having a plan, and being clear on how we were going to execute that initially was really important. So it wasn't just, look, you're coming into a school environment and here's a role, this is what the holiday structure looks like, and here's your salary, and off you go. We had a clear intention, and the top line of all of that was around having a positive impact on the health and well-being of every student in the school and using sport to build character. So that was sort of, I suppose, a north light that we could always, go back to be clear on our purpose, and that attracted a certain type of person into the team. And I suppose the next piece down from that was, for me, all roads led back to the value structure that we all worked on and put in place together, and imprinted in my mind, which were, 6 words: enjoyment, growth, hard work, resilience, respect, and unity. And you'll remember, mate, sitting in the office where we'd point back at the values that are up there, and you make decisions based on them. This is decision-making framework. So if your values align with those values and you're really, really clear on what we're about, then you start to be able to bring together a team of people. So the values is probably the second bit, and probably the final bit is just giving autonomy to make your decisions inside a framework that we sort of said, look, this is what we're trying to achieve here. These are the values. You might even recall the old decision-making framework, which was sort of prioritising what's best for the student, what's best for a group of students, what's best for the school, what's best for sport, then what's best for me as an individual. And that was sort of another element to the autonomy piece, that go and do your job inside this framework and lead and operate within the team. So, mate, that's probably the core fundamentals of.
Yeah, I think I'm smiling at this now because it is bringing back memories. And in asking the question, I love how you've actually thrown it back to the values, because you're right. And there were a variety of different individuals in there, and me included too. I'll put my hand up for this, in that there's a lot of different personalities and everyone was kind of on their own mission, trying to chase their own kind of agenda when it came to it. But I think something that, exactly what you're saying, a lot of organizations will have, the fancy mission statement and they'll have all of these things, but it ends up just being something on the wall. And something that you've given a really good example of what that actually looks like is that whenever there was any levels of uncertainty, whenever there was testing times, and between it, whether it be individuals, whether it be staffing, whether that be like the variances between different sports as well, that by having that element to just refer to, I suppose, the foundations of what you stood for and what we stood for as a team, I think you've highlighted that really, really well and done a fantastic job of it.
The extension of that wasn't just around us as a team. We selected sports captains based on the framework. We went to referees asking them to give us feedback on how our teams behaved on the field against those values. So it was whole of ecosystem stuff that we're all living it. So the machine just had a central point that I would look back to as a point of reference.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose, so the next question I've got for you then, so quite often schools lack the vision of how to get the best people for the right job, essentially. And in a lot of instances, this comes down to a lack of funds and allocated resources. And sometimes this can be quite a closed-minded approach to it. So what were some of the ways that you were able to onboard the most suitable staff by thinking laterally about additional offerings in the process? Because sometimes we're confounded, and this happens a lot in schools, that there's everyone's got their budgets in different lanes, and they go, well, that's my budget, and I can or I can't afford this or that. But something that I think you did an amazing job of was being able to go, okay, well, that is the constraints of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the right individual that we're getting is going to be constrained by our budget. So is there any kind of suggestions and tools that you were able to kind of offer the listeners in how you went outside of thinking laterally of a proposed budget, I suppose?
To be honest, I can't take too much credit for this one, because David Moulton, the headmaster at the time, was the master of allocation of funds and needs and requirements across the school, right? So when I first joined Newington myself, there was a commercial sports component, there was the 150-year sesquicentenary component, there was some sports coaching, and he plugged a range of different needs that sort of looked at suitabilities of my skill set and said, hey, this is a role that I'd like you to take on. And he was taking funding from different budgets to allow that to happen. So I'd experienced that myself. So I knew that there was the flexibility to be able to do that. And I just took that mindset into how do we build out the sports department with the right people and look at what we were trying to solve, whether it was something in, focusing on building out a learn to swim program, commercially, an aquatics program, a water polo program, and we identified somebody who had skills in a couple of those areas, but we bundled up that as one entire role, which got us to a spot that was, attractive enough to identify someone that was, Olympic coach caliber, but had the right values and was at the right stage of life to be able to fulfill a role like that. So, I think it's this combination of, okay, what are all of the opportunities that I'm trying to achieve? Goes back again to purpose, goes back again to the plan, goes back again to the execution piece right at the top. And then you're looking at how am I going to resource this? What team am I going to bring together? And then how can I pull this from different parts of budget? We were pulling budget from property, from facilities hire, from sport, and even if there are other co-curricular interests. I think, Barnesy, even you had a bit of a dabble in cadets there for a period of time, right?
So good.
and those little elements get you to a stage that says, okay, well, this makes sense for my family. I thought, also the use of school holidays. Parents these days are super, super busy. So how can you create programs that are a benefit to kids, a benefit to the parents, a benefit to staff and the school during those periods of time? But that's sort of an example of how we cobble it together. So
I think you've done a really, really good job there of talking about the budgetary side of things. And I think something in support of, because you mentioned a word there being autonomy when it comes to getting the right people on board and giving them the sense of ownership that comes with it. And I'm sure that a lot of the listeners who are involved with schools at the moment are kind of dabbling in this too, in the space that essentially quite often schools can fall into that mindset, and for lack of better terminology, of a teacher mindset of that we arrive at this time where we've got classes on periods 1 through to 6 and whatever the actual academic day looks like, and then that can tend at times to bleed through the entire schooling process where it ends up being on a like for like basis. And I suppose from a sports department side of it, is that sport often works very different to that, in that depending on the school that you're at, and particularly whether you're an overseas listener or within Australia, in Australia, in this private school setting in particular, a lot of the activities will take place and training will be before school and after school. In the government schools and the state schools, it'll be during the day. And then the other side on top of that is that the sporting side of it will compete on the weekend, on Saturdays, being in the private schooling space, but then that'll be during the week in the state schooling space. So the reason why I highlight this is because there's so many ways that the hours in a day can be utilized. And when you go back to the autonomy of what you're talking about, and essentially each coach owning their own lane, then if that means that on a particular day they're finishing at 1 p.m. because they've been there from whatever hours, then I suppose there's no judgment there, or people kind of clock watching and going, okay, well, hang on a second, that school finishes at 3 or 3:15, 3:30, whatever the school you're at. And I think that's a really big positive to highlight there too, is that not only it's about the budgetary side of things and being able to shift and work collaboratively across different lanes, but it's also about when you've brought the right people on going, you know what, I've hired you to do a job, go and do it. And if that means that from 1 o'clock until 8 o'clock on a particular day, then you're out coaching somewhere else and doing whatever, then that gives you that additional earning capacity as well, that in some instances will get you the right staff in front of other staff in competing schools.
Yeah, well, mate, there's a jersey behind your slightly shiny noggin there, Parramatta Eagles, right? Well, there's a Newington jersey there as well. However, you were, from recollection, at the Eels doing under 20s or at North Sydney Bears first of all before the Eels.
Yeah, so yeah, for several seasons, yeah.
Several seasons, and then we found a way to be flexible around your own time, because the view was what you were. Well, first of all, to have someone of your caliber inside the structure, we needed to provide that flexibility, and we saw that professional development and learning opportunity for you to bring that back into our programs inside the school environment. And then for you as well with your own, athletic development programs with external staff and using our facilities. It was like, and you were there from 5:30 in the morning. You'd do a training session yourself first of all. You'd have clients coming in. You run programs during the day. You'd leave at 2 o'clock or 3 to get somewhere else during off season that we were requiring you to go and work in a professional sporting environment, right? And you make it work because you're getting value, and kids go back to the decision-making process. What's best for the kids? What's best, it was sort of like, this is what's best for the kids. This is what's best for the school. Give you that flex because we've got better people who are better ops.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on it there, which is also really good, because just for the listeners out there to show the quality of leadership that you were able to exhibit to me, and you might not remember this, but I certainly do, is using the example that you highlighted there of that ability to, go outside and work externally. I know there was at times it was a little bit testing in that it actually, for the powers that be, up the chain management, so to speak, didn't actually want me to do that at particular times, and what that looked like, or questioned, well, how can he be everywhere all at once? And as a leader, you were able to go, well, hang on a second, you highlighted it right there in that what's best for the boys and what's best for the values and everything as part of the program. Then it's about professional development that comes with that too, because it's really easy to fall into that trap of let's take from certain skill sets of individuals who are a part of a team. But something that I thought that was like rudimentary as far as part of your tutelage was that you wanted and expected everyone to get better at their own rate. So you'd go into bat for them in order to make that come to fruition. And that's something that I remember quite clearly, in that it was about just having the autonomy to make it work and keep continuing to chase my dreams as an individual, whilst also providing best practice on site, so to speak, for the students.
And I knew that if I gave you that respect and that flexibility, that you go overs on the other side, which you did, right?
Yeah.
So the return on investment for me around giving you that was actually, this was a two-way street. It was, a shared benefit, right? So, it was one of the things inside the school environment where, certain people who were, solely education sector lens and had grown up was, okay, this is a full FTE, these are the hours, these are the holidays. And it's like, let's just try and change our thinking around that a little bit. And again, David Mulford was, as headmaster, was the one who provided for me the ability to break that down. Under a different headmaster, I may not have been able to do it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, completely understand where that would come from. So something that I was able to really see from afar, and I thought was unreal how it worked. And this is where, when we talk about revolutionising the schooling space, so I suppose something that I really enjoyed under your tutelage was watching not only the sports department evolve and produce exceptional results along the way, but how you revolutionise the commercial arm of the resources available. So from the facilities through to partnerships, and then given at times you're a factor, if we factor in school holidays and things like that, there's an abundance of opportunity. You could call it untapped, really, in schools to leverage off on the commercial side. So what are some, you've touched on it briefly, you mentioned with the learn to swim stuff and things like that. Are there any tips or strategies, I suppose, that you can provide, and what you found to be the biggest learning really when it comes to being able to commercialize opportunities within the schooling sector? Not only the fact that quite often there's exceptional facilities, but then you've also got that downtime throughout the year as well, where they may not necessarily be used to their full capacity. So if you're thinking school holidays, or alternatively, you're thinking seasonal sport, is there any suggestions that you were able, and learnings you were able to come through and recommend for the listeners when it comes to, I suppose, commercializing the full availability, or opportunities, probably more so, in a schooling environment?
Again, I'll look up to the school board and the headmaster at the time. We're looking at the school with a lens that we have amazing facilities that is unused plant, right? Plant being, basically unused assets that we could, again, better utilize for the community, right? Whether that is the internal community or the external community around where the school was, like we did with Learn to Swim. So they threw a challenge of, okay, you know, what would you do? What would you do around this? And all we did was we sort of mapped out the utilisation of facilities across all of the season. So we knew what was being used and what was not being used over what particular times. And I think the core of it when going through that process is making sure that you remember that the core function of the facilities is for the benefit of the students of the school, number one. So it cannot encroach on that. I've been to schools where it has encroached on that because they had put themselves into a situation of debt that the facility hire solution needed to pay off the principal and interest on the debt. So that became a priority ahead of the student. So for me, I think fundamentally, if the students are the absolute priority for the use of facilities, and then you have to look at how you use them outside of that. Within that framework of school council or board was behind it, headmaster was behind it, there was a mandate, then there was, okay, this cannot encroach and damage anyone's experience. Then what have we got left? So we basically, landed on a range of things, but it was predominantly around holiday camps and learn to swim programs and some before and after school sort of specialised training work. I'm thinking probably more around tennis as a sport, which you got quite involved in as
Was there a cricket arm to that too, from memory?
So the cricket arm to that as well. But we called it new sport, and new sport was holiday camps with either sport specific or multi-sport camps that also were given as a first right of running to our directors of sport and our internal staff. So it was another ability for them to
earn, yeah. Perfect.
For us, that meant that we had trusted people that were running programs with the best interests of the students inside the values framework that we operated within. So the machine, again, you go back to the values based and the decision making matrix, right? The system keeps moving.
I think the positive to that, sorry to cut you off, the positive to that is that quite often schools will be at war between the day-to-day functionality of the school and having the coaches and teachers and everything there, and then people will quite frequently approach schools and say, I want to offer this and that outside of hours. But by utilizing the model and the framework that you're referring to there in those examples, by offering it from the inside out first, not only does, I suppose, it be a positive opportunity, so further growth and opportunity, and with that comes remuneration for the staff that are already there. But one of the biggest challenges in schools is actually the people understanding what goes on in a school, and there's no better individual more capable than doing that than people who are already involved in a school, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when I did arrive, there were external facility hirers coming in, and by the time we finished, it was all in-house. But to transition it from external to in-house, once we went through that facility hire assessment, we looked at calendars, we understood what the opportunities were. Then you had to put a business, legitimate business case together with financial modelling behind that, and we worked closely with the bursar, the bursar's department, and the financial controller to sort of to map those out. And obviously, then there were allocations of the revenue that was being generated to go to internal staff, and others went into just normal facility hire income. And then suddenly we started to have pretty serious business when you roll in a learn to swim program for both internal students and external. First of all, siblings, external round, which was a learn to swim squad, which rolled into a swim, a broader swim squad, so that there was a pathway there as well. It becomes quite an interesting,
lucrative space. And I suppose so. Given I've already given you your extensive history, or I suppose your career side of things in the introduction, given your business acumen combined with a knowledge of elite sporting bodies, what do you think are the biggest mistakes or the area for growth, I suppose, that schools are making in the sporting space? So something that I really loved about your leadership was very much a visionary approach. Let's think big picture and then let's see how we can try and make it work. So What do you think, like retrospectively, now that you're not working in the schooling space and having had significant time there, what do you think is probably the biggest mistake, I suppose, that schools are overlooking where there's the greatest opportunity for growth in the sporting space outside of what we've just covered there from the facility side of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I've been out of the system for what, six or so years now. But on reflection, the biggest challenge was the balance between tradition and progress. Right. Now we're in a schooling environment which was a traditional school, but at the progressive end of the schools that were sitting inside that association. So as a legacy thinking, and this is the way we've always done it, versus how can we continue to innovate, how can we improve, is probably the biggest mistake, biggest blocker to the growth of the opportunity around sport inside schools. And sport. I work in sports innovation, and sports technology now. Globally, so I see super, not in schools, but in predominantly professional elite sport. But to go back to my experience in the school environment, some of the thinking was, again, this is the way that we have always done this. This is where sport sits inside a school framework. There's academic, there's pastoral care, and there's co-curricular. And inside co-curricular, sport sits down there, and that's where you sit. And the major priorities are academic and pastoral care, and co-curricular is probably the third child in that. For me, now that I'm working in this space, sport now, first of all, it is a career, it is a legitimate sector in the investment space, which we also are in. Sport is becoming an emerging alternate asset class for investment globally. So you see what's happening with the likes of Live Golf and sovereign funds out of the Middle East. You see investment coming into sport from the Silver Lakes and the CBCs of this world. That sport is a standalone asset class the same way that property, equities, etc. It sits in this alternate bucket, but it's becoming a standalone asset class. So I think the opportunity is for a school to look at sport through a different lens for its students. There's a great business out of Melbourne that we're reasonably well associated with called Sports Tech College, and they've written curriculums around sports tech.
I've seen this actually. Yeah, I have seen this floating around for sure. Yeah.
Integrated, a great guy called John Persico, and this can be integrated into school curriculum. So we're not just talking about sport, the lens of sport as how does it fit in the physical activity of our students, but how does it fit in the career of our students? And sport is a legitimate sector for students to go into as a long-term career path. It's not just a hobby.
And I suppose not just all about the participation side of it as well. I suppose bigger vision and bigger picture for what that looks like career-wise, exactly what you've highlighted. So I'm conscious of your time. I've got the last question for you before we get into the power round, which I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. The final question I've got for you is, and this is an interesting one. So in the Australian sporting landscape, particularly in the private schools, different states hold different values, I suppose, and emphasis on what this looks like. And what it looks like, what I'm referring to here is a lot of the time you'll often hear an even playing field being thrown around a lot in youth sport, and particularly in the private schooling space. And this is with regards to scholarships and things that come with it. So what are your thoughts on how school competitions can provide an even playing field so certain schools don't necessarily dominate in sport or vice versa when it comes to just trying to make sure that there's an even playing field for the, I suppose, dispersing what that talent looks like, and specifically in the sport, in the private schooling space?
It's a super complex issue, right? And this has been going on for decades. I found myself in the middle of it in a really critical time as well. I think that we saw Scott's College with basketball teams on the front page of Sydney Morning Heralds, and sport.
Exactly what you said. So to give some context right now, James is in New South Wales, I'm in Queensland, and I know in moving to Queensland there's a significant difference in what that looks like. Having not necessarily probably evolved at the rate, if I'm completely honest, it evolved at the rate of what New South Wales had when it comes to it. And I know in Victoria, for the international listeners, they have a completely different side of things as well, once again, with different sports being AFL, like Australian rules football, I suppose you'd say, in that there's different sporting pathways that provide opportunity within school, and outside of that, some of the other sporting pathways may not necessarily see the schooling space as their priority when it comes to the development, or necessarily the pathway for succeeding, if you want to call it succeeding, at an elite level in professional sport, let's call it that. So yeah, I suppose that's why I'm curious it is a complex beast, and I know we could probably have an episode within itself totaling on what this is. So do you have any short thoughts on what that actually looks like?
Professional sport uses drafting structures and salary caps to try and manage this. Wealthy owners in some of those competitions will just budget in a fine in regards to salary cap breach, and they just move on, right? So it doesn't, all of those type of models don't necessarily work in the professional world. Some of the school associations have a set of rules, guidelines. It ends up, whether all of the schools are culturally aligned to abide by those rules, or that there's enough flex inside those rules that allows you to get to a particular point. But when it doesn't pass the pub test, you sort of have to be called back into line. It is complicated because each individual school has its own identity and its own positioning. So, I mentioned Scots there before, and we were great competitors of Scots and great friends of Scots, and quite admired how progressive they were, right, in what they were trying to achieve. But they were super progressive. We had other schools that were far more conservative. It was legacy versus innovation, and that creates angst because one school is, okay, we're academically focused. This is the way we like our sports coached by teachers only. This is part of the way we've always done it. And then suddenly we're bringing in high quality coaches around sport. Now, that's nothing to do with scholarships. That's to do with an effective and progressive program.
Yeah, just a contemporary approach, right?
Yeah. As you'd recall, we put long-term athlete development models in place. That was for, social kids, aspiring kids, elite kids. We put in curriculum-based programs, again, for the same thing. There's a social coaching program versus aspiring versus elite, where teams would progress at different rates based on that. Now, that's very different to having a school teacher come out of the classroom and coaching a rugby team on a Wednesday afternoon, right? So that's not necessarily about. So then trying to work out, okay, is this a scholarship issue or is this a program issue? Why is this school actually performing consistently well in every sport? They must be putting people in place from a scholarship perspective.
Well, so you're highlighting that it's the simple fix isn't necessarily one rule across many. It's more a case that there's multiple layers that come with it, and it's not necessarily a scholarship issue, but there's as you mentioned, the traditionalist side of things versus a bit more contemporary approaching schools. But then you've also got the resources that are available, whether that resource being fixed resources in the environment and the training facilities and everything that come with that. And then also you've got, I suppose, the other side of the resources arm, which is the actual coaching side of things as well. And that's why I thought I'd wanted to get your thoughts on it, because it's an evolving beast and it's definitely something that hasn't gone away. And I think it's something that in the Australian side of things, it's certainly an interesting time as well, particularly as you've highlighted. It's not only about it is about the evolution of sport, but it's an evolution of sport beyond sport, being that there's so many other facets and things that students can learn from in the process. So I want to move on now really, really quickly, because I am conscious of your time and I did promise you that I wouldn't keep you too long. So we've got the power round here. So I'm going to throw 3 things at you one by one. And I just want to get your first thoughts that jump into your head before we wrap up the episode. So the first one that I've got for you, the first word is sport.
Critical part of life, impacts nearly every person in the world in some facet. couldn't live without it.
And the second one I've got is connection.
Connection, critical for both mental and physical well-being, and being part of something with a group of people that you can experience something with. So really important for your own health and well-being.
And the final one that I've got for you is vision.
Vision. Stumped me a little bit.
I've stumped the visionary.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something that energizes me. I'm never trying to change something for the sake of change. It's always around for how we can progress. So it's a space that I love to sit in. It's where it's my sort of happy place of trying to map that out. So I enjoy it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure, mate. It's definitely one of your strong skill sets. So with that, so I just wanted to say, in wrapping up this episode, a huge thanks to you, James, for your time and the insights for the listeners out there, and particularly when it comes to revolutionising the school sporting landscape. I think you've done a phenomenal job with it. It's certainly an evolving beast in the process. So thanks very much, mate. I really appreciate your time.
Mate, perfect, Pansy. It was great that you were part of all that. Mate. It's a special time in our lives. So great to be on the show.
Thanks very much, mate.
Thank you to GymAware, the #1 velocity-based training company on the market, for bringing you the guest episodes. Don't forget to check out their Flex devices with the link in the show notes, and take advantage of the opportunity exclusive to the Get Down listeners, being 5% off Flex devices using the code GETDOWN5, being the number 5 at checkout. A big thanks once again to our platinum sponsor, the team at Play, for sponsoring the Get Down podcast. Be sure to visit play.us or our show notes for further information.
1, 2.